Hello, welcome to the GW Book Club, where me and my good friend Stu read and discuss classic Games Workshop books. We cover the fiction, we cover the non-fiction, and today we're covering something very unusual, one of the rare movie tie-in horror novels that Games Workshop published in the early 2000s. Stu, how are you doing?
Good, really good, thanks. It's been a bit different this one.
It's very different, this, yeah, because we're talking about Final Destination Dead Reckoning by Natasha Rhodes. So, this is a book that was published by one of the Games Workshop imprints, Black Flame, that was a sort of smaller publishing imprint within the Black Library. And they would publish all kinds of horror and movie tie-in fiction. So there's loads of stuff, and we'll talk about some of the other fun stuff that they published as well. But I'm going to start just by giving a quick overview of the Final Destination Dead Reckoning story, and then we can get into sort of all of the fun ups and downs of of this adventure. So, if anybody is unfamiliar with Final Destination, this is a series where a group of characters narrowly avoid death because one of them has a vision, sees the future. In the first movie, it was a plane, and they see this accident happening on the plane, and all of the people who were there, they all get killed in a tragedy. So they get off the plane at the start, and then Death, having been cheated, is angry about this and finds very it's like a murderous mousetrap where they just finds all of these very complicated ways of killing off all of these different characters over the course of the movie. In this book, we are dealing with a character called Jess, who is the lead singer of a band. She goes and is giving a performance when she has a vision of the club itself that they are performing in collapsing. It's in the basement of a warehouse. It collapses. It's a great tragedy. She has this vision, and she manages to get a couple of members of the band and a couple of members of the audience out of the club. It collapses, and now Death is out to get them. I guess we should start, Stu. We'll talk about Black Flame and its curious. The very fact that Games Workshop were publishing horror tie-in fiction is just a wild element of their story. But let's talk about the book first. What did you think of Final Destination Dead Reckoning?
I mean, it was fine. It was an easy read.
Yeah.
It wasn't it wasn't it wasn't a bad read in terms of it. It wasn't boring as such. It's not the kind of thing I would normally pick up.
Right.
Um, and I do like sometimes like that kind of horror fiction, but I suppose well, I say sometimes it's usually Stephen King when I read something of a horror type. So this did feel a little bit like a kind of an easy read version
Sure.
of something like that. But there are elements some of the concepts are really quite good,
Yeah.
and I could find myself. In fact, I watched the original film with my wife as part of preparation for this as well. And I found myself watching the film thinking, I remember this. Also, this is about what I expected. It wasn't really my thing back then, but it was easy to watch. But I also found myself thinking this could be really good if it had been written by Stephen King. And then I kind of felt that at times with this book, not as much because I don't want to be really harsh with the author. I don't think it was bad at all. I think it was written quite well for what it's designed to do.
Mm.
Um, Better than many of the actual GW books that we have covered in this series. Far better written and actually achieves, I think, what it's trying to do. There are some bad stories in that list, and this isn't bad. I think it ticks the boxes. But would I read it again? No, I'm not going to be rushing to read it again or future Final Destination novels because I think there are some more.
There are, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I agree. I think there is some like it is very readable. It does flow like well, and it is very quick. You fly through it, and actually, what it does really well is create that sort of sense of tension that when the movie series is at its best, you
Mm,
get this kind of dread. And it's not as sort of it's not as dreadful because you're reading it, and obviously it has to have all of these. The author has to create these very complex scenarios and explain the presence of all of these
mm,
different elements. In the films, the real power of that comes from just seeing this fan in the corner and a sparking fuse and a flame that's been lit and has been unattended. So you're seeing all of these things, and you are yourself, when you're watching the movie, kind of piecing together all of these potential threats, and
Yeah.
how it, because the creativity of how death is going to take what it is due. That is what's fun in the movies.
Yeah.
In the book,
Yes.
we get Rhodes creating similar kind of complex scenarios at times. There are some that are quite well drawn out, I think, where you are, there's a number of different elements. Like there's a biker, the bouncer at the club who survives, and he is filling up the gas tank on his bike. He's distracted. He spills some oil on his some gasoline on his shoes. He then goes into the store. There is a heater underneath one of the shelves that's started to fuse and sort of stuff. So you're getting the fumes and you're getting the flames and you're getting all of this stuff building up. There's a really good moment when he's trying to decide what chewing gum to buy. He steps closer, so he gets closer to this heater underneath the shelves without realizing it, and that
Yeah.
then starts progressing things forward. Those kinds of moments in the book I thought were really effective and do exactly
Yeah.
what you are expecting and want from a Final Destination story.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine that's really quite hard to plan out and write as well. And you're spot on. It was done very well, and done at a different pace, at least in that original. I think I've only seen the first two films. Is the second film the one with the lorry with the
Yes, the
big
second one is
logs?
is
Yeah.
the lumber that comes off the back of the
Yes,
lorry.
that's
The
the
third
most
one is
memorable bit.
yeah, I mean a huge opening sequence that's very well done.
Yes, that's it.
Then there's an
Yeah.
amusement ride, I think is the third one. The
Right.
fourth
Yeah.
one and fifth one I've not
Might not.
seen myself, so I'm not too sure where they go.
No, no, they were all there on Amazon when I went looking. But yeah, I think the book almost does that in a slightly slower pace than you see, and it's like you said, it's more obvious in the film. It's a little bit more, and I'm going to reference something else that's on the screen. It's a little bit more like the kind of the setting it up that you get in Casualty. If you ever watched an episode of Casualty,
Sure,
when you
yeah.
when you see the child crossing the road, and then you
Yeah.
see it cuts to someone else who's having a drink before they get in the car, and you know what's going to happen. It felt a little bit more like it was set up like that in the book, or a really bad 80s safety video you used to have to watch at school, and like, kicking footballs near railway lines or something. But it does feel like it's set up with little breaks in between, and she's not frightened of taking you away from a moment to some other characters and then going back to it. She's not frightened of playing with the timeline that little bit. She leaves characters paused, moves on for a couple of pages, and then goes back to that other character where they were at that point, and
Mm.
it works as well. There's no point in thinking, oh, what's going on? So she does seem to have the ability to sort of time that right, keep the tension building. I think she does it quite well.
Yeah, and there were a couple of moments with that where it kind of wrong-footed me at least of because there's one particular moment which has been built up. There's kind of a bit of a subtle prophecy about taking the stairs. There's been a few things about elevators and lifts. And there's a character who's making some very terrible choices around sabotaging a lift in a police station because he's trying to get away with a crime. And he kind of sets himself up to be in this really disastrous situation, which I thought was quite a cool idea. That's
Mm.
something I don't recall seeing it go to that level in the movies, where this is of this guy's own design. He's kind of put himself in this situation, and it's also been sort of when the club has was destroyed, his death was foretold as something collapsing on him whilst he was halfway through a door.
Mm.
Obviously with disastrous consequences. So you're kind of creating that an expectation with this
Yes.
scene in the elevator, and then he actually manages to get out, and then has
Yeah.
to go run down the stairs. But he's also set something up on the stairs earlier that he's forgotten about, and that causes him to fall over. So you kind of then get this, oh wow, oh that's fun. So he died on the stairs, not in the elevator. And then
Yeah.
actually that wasn't even, spoilers here, but that wasn't even his actual death. That just set up, he was injured. It set up for someone else to die by falling down the elevator shaft later on.
Yes. It's clever. There's quite a few
It was
setups
good,
that were
Matt. Yeah,
deliberate
yeah.
teasers and things. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So like things like that, I think were really effective. I think for me, and I'm admitting that I'm probably not the target audience for this book at my current age. I might have been when it came out, to be fair,
Yes.
because I was,
Yeah.
I watched a lot of these movies. I was very much a horror fan and a film fan at the time, but I didn't read it at the time. So now I'm, I may be aged out of the sort of the teen slasher horror kind of market. But I think I struggled a little bit with some of the broader storytelling. So I think the characters were quite good, or at least some of the
Mm.
characters were quite good. There's a couple of characters who are supposed to be annoying, and they were successfully annoying. But then you kind of get this main character, Jess, who's kind of a bit dysfunctional. So she's got a few problems. She's making bad choices in her relationships and all this kind of stuff. But she, having seen the vision and then saved everyone's lives, is suspected by the police of maybe being involved. And then she makes a
Yeah.
load of terrible choices to sort of further incriminate herself throughout the course. So she's almost being pursued most of the book.
Hmm.
And some of that stuff was just not, I didn't enjoy as much of that. Like they were constantly running away from the police, or and it just didn't feel like that was kind of, you're already on the run from death. I don't know, you need to be on the run from the police as well.
Yeah, and then again on the run for them because
Yeah,
you seem to be
exactly. Yeah, and then
arrested multiple times. It didn't seem to. It seemed to be
yeah,
a little bit. Surely the second arrest, you are going to be securely locked up. It's far
right.
too easy, wasn't it? But
Yeah, a little bit, and it kind of felt like I didn't feel like I needed the stakes to be raised in that way. I mean, similarly,
mm,
there's a sequence later on where almost out of nowhere there's like an attempted mugging,
yeah,
and that kind of felt like, and then the mugging goes from one guy threatening them to all of a sudden there's a gang of five guys turns up as well, and that as an escalation of the tension kind of felt a little bit unnecessary when you've got Death like doing
yeah,
all of this stuff and arranging all of these circumstances and situations. It kind of works better for me when
mm,
it's really innocuous stuff. It's just a person in their kitchen or a person in their bathroom, or not paying attention crossing the street, as opposed to someone already threatening you with a knife and a gun and a gang of guys. To be fair, that did have a surprising ending, that sequence.
again, yeah,
Um,
yeah,
which I kind of like. I mean, a rogue shot from a misfired gun then causes something to fall onto someone, which
yeah.
that was quite fun as well.
Yeah, I think so. But it does feel a little bit like thinking about. I've made a few notes about the amount of times the police were involved, but it does feel a little bit like there's a lot more air time or written time given to the police danger or the gang fight danger, and the actual supernaturally parts, the engineered re-deaths or
Mm.
follow-up deaths or whatever you want to call it, they're actually quite short.
Yeah,
And it felt like that the story was being led by the running away from the police more at times than the supernatural side of it. But I don't think it spoilt it, but it did feel a little bit unbalanced at times, and it felt like a good way into the story that not much had happened in terms of them discovering what was going on. Only she really knew. It took a long time to her to get everyone together and tell them.
yeah,
And I suppose when you're comparing that to the film, but it did feel like that. Yeah, it was a story about her running from the police and the collapse of the club, rather than a story about why that happened and her premonition. That was introduced very, very late in the story. In my opinion, it felt like the final third, definitely the second half of it.
yeah. I think you're right there. Yeah, and I also went back and rewatched the original film in preparation, and I still enjoy it. I think it's got a charm, and there's a lot of nostalgia for me there now. And it is surprising how much of that film, like in my memory, it was just one after the other, super complicated, kind of Heath Robinson, Rube Goldberg deaths of
Mhm.
all of these characters, which I think is what the franchise becomes later on, where you just get these really elaborate, long running death sequences. In the first movie, there's only a couple that are that complicated. Some of
Yeah,
them are just like super, super quick. So I think the balance on that in the book was quite similar and quite good. And there is, the police are involved in the first movie, and the guy is they're suspected of blowing up the plane, for example. So there is a precedence for that kind of stuff. But yeah, the balance didn't feel quite right. And I totally agree. It was really surprising that it was very, very late that the remaining characters come together and they have the conversation about this is what's happening and death is coming and don't you believe me? And then from that, like things then they again make some strange choices, and there's a very late sort of sudden about turn that felt like it kind of came out of nowhere, which was that, and it's quite a cool like character reveal. So Jess has long had a problem with her parents. We see a little bit of that with her dad. Her mum and her dad never really supported her, and she'd always wanted them to come to one of her gigs. And very late in the book, she realizes that, oh, actually, maybe my mum, who is now missing, was at the gig. So they then go to the morgue to try and see if the body is there. And like that's a really interesting idea, but that came so late that it didn't feel like there was enough time to explore that like quite interesting idea.
Yeah, it's a really good idea. And you're right. It feels like a hook that should have been made more of, and probably should have been in the first third as part of building. What you know, that could have been used as a way of explaining to the others. This is how I know what's going to happen because this has also come up, and she's got these kind of weird lucid dreams that are semi-premonition, which we've seen in the films a little bit. But she has multiple lucid dreams, I'd say, and yeah, it feels like that was brought in a little bit too late. And I wonder, I don't know if you noticed this, there's some really nice descriptive work at certain points, but it's not consistent throughout the story. So certain things get a lot of time. Like anytime there's any talking about the music and the setup of the band and how the music's played, this is really in depth, talking about chord progressions and sound and all of this. And you're thinking the author's really, really into music here, knows some music. You Google her and you find out that she's married to a musician.
Oh, right. Okay.
She moved to California and married to a musician. You're thinking, so she's actually got real knowledge. You can see that she's showing that through the writing, but you don't get that level of detail through other parts. So it feels like at the beginning, it was really the initial scene is excellent when they're talking about the band being on the stage before the club goes. It's really well written, but that same kind of level of detail and knowledge, it just isn't there with all those other elements throughout the books. It feels a little bit unbalanced at times.
Yeah.
But I thought that was quite interesting. I thought, oh, she seems to know a lot about music. Is she music? And as soon as I Googled her, she's like, oh, no, she's married to a musician.
I quite liked as well that Jess, because she's obviously, she's in the band and lead singer and thinks in terms of music. Like there are a number of elements where she's like hearing noises and sort of classifying those in her head as like what chord they are or that kind of, which I thought was quite a nice sort of character.
It was really well. I wouldn't change it. I like it, but it really stood out to me, and that was before I did the little bit of googling and found out the connection there. But it just feels like they were so well done, loads of detail, where other parts just seemed a little bit brief in comparison.
But yeah, ultimately, I don't know if this has been done in the movies, it might have been in a movie I've seen and forgotten from the franchise. But the way in which it ended, I thought was pretty cool as well. Where, and again, heavy spoilers on this, but the like two of the characters manage to escape death because they actually do die briefly for different reasons during a sort of final confrontation, and then they are skipped by death. But it's not skipped like in some of the movies where the death is prevented. It actually takes place. And then they are saved by paramedics and brought back. And I thought that was quite cool. That was a really nice sort of way of sort of solving the problem of how do you come to a satisfying ending that doesn't kind of, the original movie has a great ending where you kind of have skipped a couple of people and it comes back around. It's a terrific final shot. Like that's really good. You have something kind of similar here, but you also managed to get the satisfying. Eric, who is a frustrating character because he's awful, almost gets his just desserts at the end of the book. But yeah, you kind of also get the satisfying romantic conclusion as well for the two sort of leads. And there was some really nice, like, swerving around of who the leads, besides Jess, but who the other sort of co-leads were. So there are other potential love interests, there's other characters. I was very, very surprised when one of the other love interests very suddenly died. And it was really effective. It's as close as I think you would get to some of the shocking sudden deaths in the movie franchise. Like
Yeah.
it's affected really well in that way.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree. I agree. I think there's enough bits like that that made it work. It just
yeah,
yeah, it felt like it was a first third was I quite enjoyed the first third, but it was slow in comparison to how much more you could have put that time into some of the stuff that was going on in the sort of the second part of the
yeah,
book. But again, this is looking for things to kind of not criticize, but things to kind of talk about and think about. Really,
yeah.
essentially, the book did what it was designed to do.
I mean, I think, yeah, I would
I
totally
think
agree.
for me, it did.
It did for me as well. And I think if I were, if I was a big Final Destination mega fan and I was like, okay, there's a series of books that are tied into this, and I really want to continue to explore the universe beyond the films, I feel like this does a good job of that. This is exactly what a
Mm.
tie-in novel is supposed to do. It expands the world. There's a couple of interesting ideas around how, death appears to Jess and kind of she has these extra visions that are different to the movies and kind of maybe a bit more mythology there. So that kind of thing is quite cool. And yeah, it is a very readable book within the bounds and sort of expectations of a sort of teen horror movie franchise. So
Yeah,
yeah, I will admit, part of me went into this a little worried that we were going to be reading a book that it was a big slog. It wasn't going to be fun. It wasn't going to be interesting, and it did manage to, it managed to deliver on the same kind of feeling you get when you go and sit down and watch these kinds of movies. Which
yes,
sometimes I will do. I like this kind of movie, so it worked for me. It was good. Yeah, I'm not gonna I'm not gonna say it's of the top the level of some of the tie-in fiction we've read for Warhammer or the GW books and stuff like that. But it was a very competent example of horror movie fiction. I would say.
yeah. It read like one of the films did in
Yeah,
most components of it, and I suppose it does the same kind of thing. Occasionally, you just want to watch something really easy and trashy, and that's also a little bit funny because it's so crazy or gross the way people. And the book did that, and because it was so easy and quick to read, it didn't really feel like you could, if you've been reading a lot recently, you could blast through this in a few hours
mm.
easily in an evening. It was easy enough to read to do that. So, yeah, it's. I think it's a book, a trashy Saturday night horror film in book form when it worked.
Yeah, I agree, and it's very interesting to me. So, we talked a little bit about Black Flame generally, but Black Flame published a whole series of Final Destination novels. So Natasha Rhodes actually wrote at least one of the movie tie-ins. I think they did the first three movies as books, and then
Mm.
they did this continued sort of universe of fiction,
Yeah,
and a number of different authors wrote in those. I don't know whether it's because of limited print runs or because they were super popular or what it was about them, but there were a good. There must be 8 or 9 of these Final Destination novels, and now they are very highly sought after. They're very difficult to get hold of. I know that sometimes like eBay pricing can be ridiculous, and no one
yeah.
would ever pay it. I'm going to guess this is one example because one of the books from the series is currently listed on eBay at £936. Now, I don't know if there's mega fans out there looking for them, but yeah, that's the top end. But across the whole Black Flame like series, there are some books that are multiple hundreds of pounds and do
Yeah.
seem to move. Even this book would cost you about £80 if you were to buy it, and it seems like
Yeah.
there've been sales on it. But yeah, the Black Flame tie-in fiction, they did Jason X, so the Jason Voorhees, the Friday the 13th series. They did Nightmare on Elm Street. They did straight up Friday the 13th, Twilight Zone. There's loads of different stuff. Butterfly Effect, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Some of these are straight novelizations of
Yeah.
the movies, and some of them are just like, we're going to write a brand new book about like set in this world. I'm quite tempted. Some of the Nightmare on Elm Street books, because they also sell for £100 or £200 each.
Wow.
Some of them sound interesting though, are like random Freddy Krueger adventures. So yeah, I mean, it kind of amazes me this whole line of books. because Black Flame also did load of 2000 AD fiction. There's ABC Warriors and Judge Dredd and all of the sort of classic characters from over in 2000 AD. Yeah, and it's a really interesting quirk of the mid 2000s where like I was trying to find out a little bit more about this, and apparently a big part of this was that obviously you had Games Workshop with a load of new money coming in because of Lord of the Rings in the mid early to mid 2000s,
Yeah.
and Lord of the Rings was by New Line, and New Line also owned all of these horror properties. So
Right.
when the deals were being done around Lord of the Rings, there was a conversation around, oh, well, would Games Workshop, with your publishing arm, would you like to do a load of fiction on all of these existing properties? And that is why this completely wild collection of fiction exists under a Games
It's
Workshop
crazy.
owned imprint. Yeah, it's fascinating to me. From what I'm told, they weren't particularly successful, most of the books. Apparently, one of the best sellers in the Black Flame range was Snakes on a Plane, which I'm astonished. I don't know. I'd love to know why. I'd love to know why that just managed to catch people's imaginations and was the one book that did the best.
Yeah, it's interesting. I knowing what we know about the way they market their books makes you wonder whether they were ever going to be successful because they probably weren't in the right places,
Well, I
which is
feel
a
like
shame. But
I think they got the Black Flame books into like proper high street bookstores. I remember distinctly putting some of these titles onto the shelves of Waterstones when I worked there.
right,
So they definitely managed to make it into those stores, and I guess because it's not they are known properties. If you're doing a Judge Dredd book or
mm,
a Friday the 13th book, that's probably going to be picked up. Certainly in the the early to mid 2000s, is probably better known than Warhammer or
yeah,
40k
oh
to
yeah,
most Waterstones or
yeah.
high
Well, I
street
think
books.
all of these would be.
Right. So as a way to get into those stores,
Yeah,
it does kind of make sense. There was also Solaris, which was another imprint
mm,
that was created around the same time by the Black Library. That was to do original science fiction and fantasy
right.
writing. So it's
Okay.
interesting to see a load of authors sort of cross over between Black Library, Black Flame, and Solaris, doing all sorts of different genre work. So yeah, it seems like
Hmm.
a really interesting time for Games Workshop publishing beyond the typical stuff we'd expect.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how much money they made from it and whether it was close to the continuing or it was just an absolute disaster.
Yeah,
Or is it a
well,
case of we're making a bit of money, but the amount of work it's going to involve, they'd have to expand and invest new editors that specialized in those kind of areas
hmm,
and attracting new talent and maintaining existing talent in a whole load of IPs that they were unfamiliar with. So all the complications of managing and dealing with New Line and potentially other studios, and you can imagine that's hard. And they always like to be at the control of their own IP. We
hmm,
see that again and again, and it's a lot easier when you know your own stuff, isn't it?
yeah,
And that's these want to be what they've retreated to since then.
yeah,
More and more. So it may well be what it is. It's just a case of maybe it made a bit of money, but in order to make it really successful, why are we doing this? We don't need to be doing this. This is not what
sure.
we're best at. Let's give it up, and move it on. It may well be they just had a limited contract time as well, and
Yeah, absolutely could have been that, right? If you're
it ran
renewing
out.
Lord of the Rings, maybe you don't want to renew the books if they're not selling as
Hmm.
well. And then there is exactly like you say. I'd love to know how successful it was in sort of raw numbers, but was it literally that case, the exact same thing that did in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, which was the opportunity cost? So, like you
Yeah.
say, do you really want to employ a load of editors for all of these random IPs when those same editors could be working on Horus Heresy books that are going to be, New York Times bestsellers? So it who knows? Who knows? The other interesting extra thing that Black Flame did as a publisher was to bring back the Dark Future.
Mm.
So there was a not only did they republish some of the previous GW books and Box Tree books Dark Future novels. They also commissioned a load of new stories set in the Dark Future world. There's a bit of controversy around the sort of broad approach here because obviously Dark Future that we've read and loved in the GW book club, all of that is set in the run up to the millennium,
Yeah.
and it has a distinctly sort of 80s into the early 90s kind of vibe. A lot of that was updated to make the pop culture references more relevant. The timeline was shifted onwards slightly because we'd already had the millennium and the dark future didn't happen. So this fiction has to be set in the future still. I think it's
Yeah.
a real shame though.
Mm. Yeah, you could have kept it as an alternative
Yeah,
pass, an alternative. That's probably what would have happened now, I think, if it was.
you'd like to
That
think
would be
so,
the
wouldn't
way it would be. I think people have become a little bit more, excuse me, nuanced with the way they like to talk about their science fiction and their fantasy and yeah, I think it would have just been accepted as these people. The customer base will understand this,
you?
but maybe back then they thought, oh no, we've got to update it. But well, I might read one of those one day. I've got one of them. I always forget which
I
one
would
it is,
like
but
to. Yeah, I'd like to. I mean, there's a handful that came out. I mean, you've got Golgotha Run. They
that's what I've
did
got. Yeah.
American Meat, Jade Dragon by James Swallow, who went on to write with a load of Black
Mm.
Library stuff. Reality Bites, In the Jungle, No One Can Hear You Scream. And then they republished a couple. They did Route 666, Crocodile Tears, Demon Download, and Comeback Tour. So, yeah, I think I would be interested to see how they approached a sort of post Kim Newman Dark
Mm.
Future setting. Because we've talked many times about how much we love that setting and how much could be done with it. So I'd be really interested to see if they expand it in interesting ways and sort of tell interesting stories. Um, I suppose one extra note that I just absolutely love was that when when we were reading the Kim Newman Dark Future stories, you get a moment when Freddy Krueger and Mike Myers and I think it is Jason Voorhees as well
Yeah.
are all in the same prison asylum as one of the villainous characters. There's a riot, and they all sort of kick off and kill a load of people. But so in the dark future, those characters are sort of canonically present. So for the fact that Games Workshop then also published books featuring most of those characters,
Oh
I
yeah,
think is just
yeah,
a really fun little bizarre crossover where
yeah.
it loops it all back around, and then they publish new Dark Future novels at the same time as well. So yeah, just a very
Mad.
odd quirk that is fun.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know they were they all New Line those films as well. I
I
probably
think
wouldn't.
all of them except for Halloween. I don't think
Mm.
Halloween was one of the titles.
And what was one was because New Line was obviously Ball, wasn't it? And it's Warner Brothers subsumed them, I think, afterwards.
Right.
That's something else that could be down to why they didn't carry on with those things.
Sure.
Because I'm sure by the time the Hobbit films came out, that second trilogy, it was no longer just New Line. It was
Right.
Wingnut, and New Line was part of it, but it's Warner Brothers by then.
Right.
I know that Games Workshop have renewed that license at least once. I think they've not officially said it. I think recently it must have been redone again as well. I imagine there was changes with the Tolkien Enterprises stuff, and we've obviously had a new film recently, so they've definitely renewed it once, maybe even a second time. It could be even sorry, a third time, could even be a fourth. So
Right.
I wonder whether that's first renewal after the initial films were coincided with these things dropping off. I
Mm.
wonder.
Yeah, that would make sense. That would definitely make sense. Yeah, and I suppose it's as good a time as any to kind of take stock and kind of look at how successful these are or are not. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think overall it was a fun experiment to sort of step outside our usual sort of
It definitely was.
40K
Definitely
and
was.
Warhammer
Like a
Fantasy
palate
space.
cleanser of a story.
Exactly. Yeah. Try something a little bit different. Sample a different genre. I mean, I don't normally read this sort of horror fiction generally, but especially not sort of what you would probably class as teen horror, YA kind of horror stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was interesting and it was well written and sort of did exactly what I was expecting and kind of wanted it to do for that genre. So I think overall, a success on this one.
Yeah. I think so as well. It was good fun. I didn't hate reading it at all, and I think the book was a success for what it was. Not going to win any awards, but it was definitely a success, and I think she did a good job
Mm.
with it. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
pleasantly
And
surprised.
who knows? Perhaps we'll come back and maybe we'll read one of those other tie-in, or maybe we'll find our way to a Freddy Krueger novel or
That
the
would be
the
good.
the other Dark Future stuff or whatever. But normally we read a lot of Warhammer and 40K fiction as part of the GW Book Club. We've got some big plans for later in the year, some exciting. I don't want to reveal too much, but some pretty influential books from the Black Library stable. I think we're going to be tackling later in the year, so that's definitely something on the pad. Until next time, Stu, where can people find you online?
Miniature Realms and primarily YouTube because everything else leads to YouTube. So it's either YouTube or me promoting my YouTube.
All roads do
Mm,
lead back
mm.
to YouTube these days. I think that's definitely
Yes,
true.
yeah. Unfortunately, not all to my YouTube, but if it could be, that would be good.
Well, I will put links to all of your stuff down in the description below. People can also find all of mine. I'm just Jordan Sorcery pretty much everywhere. And until next time, folks, thank you very much for watching. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.